First of all, I'd like to welcome you all, and I'd like to welcome the senators and representatives assembled behind me. I know that it's the 8th week of session. It's a very, very busy week, so we're grateful that they've taken a few minutes to come and stand in support of our current marriage law and keeping marriage as between one man and one woman. We do have several Republicans and Democrats alike who were unable to be with us today due to their busy schedules and the busyness of a Wednesday here at the Capitol, but we are grateful for their support nonetheless. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce John Helmberger. He is Chairman of Minnesota for Marriage and CEO of the Minnesota Family Council for some brief remarks.
Thank you, Autumn. Introduction of the bill to legalize gay marriage in the state of Minnesota this morning, or rather the announcement of the pending introduction of the bill comes as no surprise to us. It's exactly what we warned would happen throughout the last year and a half. Without a constitutional amendment protecting the definition of marriage in our state from lobbyists and legislators who are determined to change it. It is a huge mistake to believe the lie that the November election outcome was a mandate to legalize gay marriage. On the contrary, voters clearly said that they want to keep the status quo with respect to marriage, that our state marriage law is adequate, as opponents of the amendment disingenuously argued throughout the campaign. Recent Survey USA poll results reflect this. The majority of respondents said they want our marriage law left the way it is. The legislators gathered with us today, along with many others who could not join us, understand this and support Minnesota's marriage law.
Next, we do have a few of our representatives and senators who have some remarks they'd like to share with you. They can introduce themselves to you, but first I'd like to introduce Senator Warren Limmer.
Good afternoon. My name is Warren Limmer. I'm the ranking Republican on the Senate Judiciary Committee. And if you remember, I was the chief author of the marriage amendment back in 2011, which brought this decision to the public. I've been hearing a lot of things about the justification for same-sex marriage bill that was introduced today. The most surprising one is that somehow it's a mandate from the people. The result of the marriage amendment was a mandate from the people that justifies same-sex marriage. Well, it is in no way a mandate from the people of Minnesota. The people simply said that they didn't want to include the definition of marriage as it's written in Minnesota state law and include it in the state constitution. There was never a discussion. Matter of fact, the opponents often said, as they justified and tried to get voters to vote for their side of the issue, they claimed that there's no need for change, that Minnesota's law of DOMA law will not change if we vote no. I'm just amazed that now the rules have changed when it involves an opportunity to pass a bill versus what it was back prior to the November election. You know, we commonly get into this all the time. Justification is for a moment, and then when things do change in your favor, then there's a rush. The very rush of redefining marriage in a radically new and different direction it was not considered by the public in November's election. Matter of fact, I know of personally a concentration of senior voters who were convinced by telephone calls that if they voted no on the amendment, they were actually voting against gay marriage. So there's lots of reasons to believe that Minnesota's public is not ready for same-sex marriage, and nor are they ready for the legislature to take it upon themselves to change it at this time.
Good afternoon. I'm State Representative Glenn Gruenhagen, House District 18B. I'm a strong supporter of traditional marriage, and I oppose any redefinition of marriage. The primary reason is from an economic and from an educational standpoint. There's over 2,500 studies in the social sciences that confirm the benefits of traditional marriage for men, women, and especially children. I have two of those studies in front of me. The first one is from the 2007 California State University in Long Beach, and it shows that if the government simply reinforced traditional marriage, not only could you reduce the achievement gap among our students and children, but you could actually eliminate it without spending hundreds of millions of billions of dollars. Okay? And we all know we have a huge problem in the state of Minnesota with the achievement gap. The second study done by the Heritage Foundation, specifically for Minnesota, shows that if the government simply reinforced traditional marriage, you could lift 90% of the children in poverty out of poverty. Think about that, ladies and gentlemen. So those two studies bring into question why we want to redefine marriage, and secondly, why does the government for the last 50 years have policies that actually undermine marriage, whether it's our welfare system, the marriage penalty in the state and federal tax code, and I could go on and on. Finally, I support traditional marriage because if we redefine it, it will produce mandated curriculum into our public schools. And I have examples of that curriculum along. And I think if the average parent saw what that curriculum taught, they would not want it to their children. Finally, we are not talking about, when we're talking about gay marriage, we're not talking about an immutable characteristic, like the color of your skin, okay? The human genome map was completed in 2003. There is no gay gene, okay? So the concept that you're born that way, and it's an immutable characteristic, is an unscientific lie, okay? The human genome map has been completed. I urge you, as the news media, to give both sides a fair and open hearing on this debate, because it has tremendous ramifications, not only for our society, but for our children in general. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Representative Peggy Scott. I represent Andover and Northern Coon Rapids and one precinct in Ramsey. Thank you for being here today. And no matter what form this bill takes, the debate over this issue needs to be very transparent. The public, above all, needs to know what the impacts of a decision like this, of a law like this, would be. For example, the impact of redefining marriage on religious liberties reaches far beyond concern for clergy being forced to marry gay couples that are wanting to be married at a church that disagrees with that. So, again, I just hope that this process is transparent and that the truth comes out to the people of Minnesota on the long-term ramifications of this. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Senator Dan Hall from Burnsville. I want to come at it with a similar angle, religious liberty. Religious liberty, again, goes far beyond the church. It also has to do with businesses, schools, charities, nonprofits alike. As a member of the clergy that I am, this bill says I won't have to perform marriages, and yet what will the bill next year look like? It'll change. Once you open the door, you're not going to be able to shut it. I'll tell you today, there have been many professionals in other states that have been taken to court on this issue of not performing or not being a part of a wedding ceremony. I personally will go to jail before I ever perform a marriage to a homosexual.
Hi, I'm Senator Paul Gazelka from the Nisswa area. We all are approaching this from slightly different views. Some of the things we share are the same, some are different. But what I wanted to say and highlight is I think basic rights should be available to all, but marriage is uniquely between a man and a woman, and we should not redefine it. So there is a place that I think we can find somewhere in that area. If we pass gay marriage, religious rights, parental rights, business rights are all going to be infringed. There will be changes, and you can just look at other states or look to the north in Canada, and you can see that there clearly are changes. Last year, DFL legislators argued that we did not need a constitutional amendment because marriage was in our statute, which is true. But that premise and why they brought it out was not true, because you see some of those same legislators now promoting gay marriage. This, to me, is just another example of the DFL overreach, one of many issues. Thank you.
All right, with that, I'd like to make two final brief points before we open it up to y'all for some questions. And the first is, I think this morning's bill introduction really highlights the important point that Minnesotans as a whole need to be reaching out to their legislators at this point and letting them know that they did not send their legislators to St. Paul to redefine marriage, that the marriage amendment's defeat was certainly not a mandate for that, and the time has indeed come. It's come for Minnesotans to reach out to senators and representatives alike, offer them support for folks like those behind me who stand in support of our current marriage law, and then encourage those who may be still deciding on the issue that as their constituents they do not want marriage redefined in our state. That doesn't align with Minnesota values. That doesn't align with who we are. And then secondly, this morning I know in the press conference it was noted that there is a religious liberty protection added to the gay marriage bill. While no doubt well-intentioned, it needs to be pointed out that that religious liberty protection doesn't even scratch the surface of the religious liberty implications. Some of the representatives and senators gathered behind me briefly touched on that. What happens is, excuse me, we see that when marriage is redefined, that impacts every state policy and law. It doesn't occur in a vacuum. And so then state anti-discrimination laws can in turn be used as a weapon to punish those who disagree with the state's new law based on religious reasons. And so it's important to realize that the religious liberty implications extend far beyond clergy being forced to marry people they disagree with marrying. As Senator Gazelka mentioned, it extends to parents, it extends to individuals, private business owners. And so the religious liberty protection that's been offered to this bill doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of the implications of gay marriage for our state. And as Representative Scott said, this needs to be a very transparent and open debate as we consider what the implications of, quite frankly, this engagement in social experimentation is. This is a very new thing. Any states that have redefined marriage have only done so within the last decade, and we need to go into this discussion with our eyes wide open. Thank you. Yeah, hi, sorry. I'm Autumn Lev. I'm the Director of Governmental Affairs and Communications for Minnesota for Marriage. Yep. Questions?
To Senator Limmer's point, Senator, you talked about the outcome of the vote and Minnesota for Marriage warning voters that failing to pass the amendment could result in what has now happened. Doesn't that show, in a sense, that voters actually knew the consequences and they didn't pass the amendment anyway?
No.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is never once would anyone who read the bill, who read the referendum question, would ever come to a conclusion like that. The question, as you might recall, was, should the Minnesota Constitution be changed to define marriage simply between one man and one woman? There wasn't a multiple. This was not a multiple choice question for the voters. This was simply, do we want to put that definition that was in existing state law into our state constitution? Plain and simple.
Senator, are there enough votes to defeat this particular bill?
I don't know. I haven't done a head count. As of this morning, we thought that there was a gathering cloud coming toward the Capitol, that it might happen, but I don't have a hard count on that yet.
Senator Hall, one of the most important parts of this bill from the supporters say that there is a religious exemption. Can you tell us why you think there is not, judging from your comments, that you'll go to jail before you perform it?
And I said there is that in there, and but what will happen this year could be changed next year. So it's a slippery slope, and I think, like many ministers, there is no way that we're going to allow ourselves to be put in a situation that we would have to perform a homosexual marriage.
Well, just help me with this. Is that happening in other places?
I know for other businesses, but clergy, not yet. Well, hopefully never. Yeah.
Can I to add to that one too, because religious rights are not just about a pastor choosing who to marry. If you look at the Catholic Church in both Massachusetts and California, as a religious organization, they participated in adoption. They often adopted some of the most troubled kids, and their religious belief said it should only be with a married couple that's a man and a woman. The court, or basically because of how the courts ruled, the state said you must now marry to a same-sex couple, and they said, well, that's going to violate our rights, so they had to step away. So that was a major religious infringement that would not have happened had the laws remained the same.
Where that is?
Massachusetts and California. Massachusetts,
They must perform.
they must adopt to a same-sex couple.
Which is a little different than performing the ceremony.
True, but your original question about religious rights, I wanted to say it
Sure.
encompasses more than just, a pastor being able to marry or not marry.
It's something they're calling the Knights of Columbus exemption, where you don't have to rent out your Knights of Columbus hall for a gay marriage ceremony.
And one other example I'll give is parents in Massachusetts where they wanted to withhold their kids because they didn't want them being taught in elementary school, whether it's Heather has two mommies or whatever, and usually that's based on a moral religious conviction. They were not allowed to take their kids out. So there definitely is a collision between religious liberty and sexual liberty here. One is in the Constitution, the other one is not.
And Pat, the fact that the provision is in the bill simply highlights and underscores the reality that this is a significant concern that exists in the real world. And religious liberty should never, ever be at the whims of legislative action. 2 years, 4 years, 10 years from now, if they're hanging their hat on this provision in the bill and it becomes law, that provision can go away. Religious liberty is inherent, innate. It should not be bestowed legislatively. And the fact that it's in the bill demonstrates that that's a serious concern. And it extends beyond the clergy. I'm a father of a number of children. Mostly they've been privately educated. A lot of that was driven by some desire for religious education. And let me just connect a couple of dots for you there. We're going to have some anti-bullying legislation. And from what I'm hearing, I don't know if it's been introduced yet, but from what I've been hearing, they want to extend that to private education. Can you connect the dots there? We're not going to be able to potentially, in a private institution, teach some biblical standards on homosexuality if you're a Christian. There are significant concerns, and the fact that that provision is in the bill simply highlights that that's a reality.
Let me get back to another question that was previously asked me, the question of, do I have a head count? I don't have a head count, but the one thing that is significant that you must know is that 75 of the 87 counties in the state of Minnesota, 75, their populations voted for the marriage amendment, upholding a traditional view of marriage. We have a lot of new senators and representatives, many of them Democrat, that come from that area. I think in order to get a head count, you're going to have to ask them, are you going to vote against the wishes of your public, as outlined in November's election in your county, or are you going to go down your own path? That's the biggest question, and that's the question I don't have an answer to. But that's the one focus of this entire debate. The end result will depend entirely on DFL votes in rural Minnesota.
Have you thought about proposing alternate legislation, perhaps civil unions, or even a constitutional amendment? You say that this is not the will of the people. Have you thought about talking to Democrats about doing a constitutional amendment?
I haven't as of this time.
Are you going to be doing anything to persuade those DFL legislators to vote against this bill? Is there any effort?
I try to persuade Democrats on almost every issue around here. Sometimes, on rare occasion, they might even listen to a few of us.
Could you expand on that a little bit, though? What kind of lobbying presence are you guys going to have at the Capitol? What kind of things are you going to be doing?
Sure. Well, of course, the lobbying presence at the Capitol, we are directly lobbying some of the legislators, but also our lobbying efforts are very much grassroots based. As Senator Limmer was saying, this is the time for folks to be reaching out to their legislators and saying, look, I'm your constituent. The marriage amendment passed by a strong percentage in your district, sometimes by an even greater percentage than what the candidate was elected by. Are you going to go against me? This is not the time to do that. So that's really where our efforts are focused. Of course, we were the Marriage Amendment Campaign Organization, so it's our job to educate voters that now we're not trying to get every single vote and tell people to vote yes. We're switching. We need to encourage you to reach out to your legislators. That's exactly what we're doing. And Baird, to get back to your question about alternative legislation, I think if this were completely fair and transparent conversation about marriage, about, as our opposition claims, about rights and benefits and things like that, then we need to be laying out all the options on the table. There needs to be a discussion about civil unions. Who's for that? Who's against that? There needs to be a discussion about reciprocal beneficiary arrangements, which is a strong private law contractual arrangement in which any two people who can't otherwise be married can, in fact, get some of those rights and benefits, like inherit from one another, insurance beneficiaries, that type of thing. All of these things need to be laid on the table, and they're not. Quite frankly, our opponents are going straight for marriage without any further discussion, without addressing all the consequences that will have on Minnesota, and that's not fair. That's not fair to Minnesotans.
You're quite possibly going to have some Republicans who will flip on this and support this gay marriage bill. Is there going to be any political retribution from your organization, Minnesotans for Marriage, where you will campaign against them if they do, coming up in the next election?
We'll have to see. We know Senator Peterson already has. Yes, we're aware of that.
How much outside money do you anticipate is going to come in? National money you think is going to come in? And are you having any conversations with any national organizations about beefing up the effort, depending on how far this goes this session?
Well, National Organization for Marriage is a coalition partner of Minnesota for Marriage. In case you're unaware, Minnesota for Marriage is a coalition. Some of its largest coalition partners are National Organization for Marriage, the Minnesota Catholic Conference, and Minnesota Family Council, in addition to the tens and thousands of individual Minnesotans, as well as organizations, churches, things of that type. So we are a coalition. So, of course, support does come in from National Organization for Marriage, but right now it is largely grassroots supported.
Do you anticipate a fair amount of money coming in? Is this fairly high on their radar screen, this impending battle here in Minnesota?
Well, I mean, it is National Organization for Marriage. They care about the marriage battles in all the states. I know they're working in Illinois as well as Minnesota right now, and some of the others.
And just one final, if I may. How closely are you working with the Archdiocese, the Catholic Archdiocese, on this? Do you anticipate that their level of involvement will match what it was during the campaign to try to pass the marriage amendment?
I think I'll let Jason Adkins, the Executive Director of the Minnesota Catholic Conference, address that question.
Good afternoon. My name is Jason Adkins. I am the Executive Director of the Minnesota Catholic Conference and an Executive Committee of Minnesota for Marriage. I just want to make 2 points. First of all, with regard to the question about will Minnesota for Marriage become essentially a political action committee and be punishing candidates, the answer to that question is emphatically no. That's the job of other organizations who are engaged in these conversations and these debates. The purpose of Minnesota for Marriage is primarily to preserve the definition of marriage currently in statute in Minnesota, and that conversation will continue, but we will not be engaging as an organization, Minnesota for Marriage, in political campaign battles against particular candidates. I also wanted to point out, too, that there are a number of Democrats who have already come on record as supporting our position, and that should be known as well. So I hear a lot of coverage in the media about Republicans flipping and going the other way on this issue, but there are Democrats out there who are supporting marriage, and statistically there are stronger numbers of a stronger percentage of Democrats who support marriage than Republicans who oppose it. I also want to say, in particular, with regard to that question, the Minnesota Catholic Conference is a supporter of Minnesota for Marriage and a coalition member, and we will be opposing the bill. And as far as particular strategy or outreach, that's being considered right now, and we'll be discussing that further. I want to make one point, too, and just to crystallize what this debate is about. We really need to focus on what the real issue is here. It's not about the subjective reasons why any two people want to get married. The question is, as a public policy matter in front of this legislature, is do we need an institution in civil law that connects marriage and connects children to their biological parents? That is the question. That's what we're debating here as a public. That is what marriage is. That's what marriage does. It's a reality that unites a man and a woman to any children born from their union. It serves important public policy purposes, and those need to be considered and those need to be discussed. By erasing mothers and fathers from our public policy, we're communicating that it doesn't make a difference if you have both a mom and a dad. The kids can be raised without both a mother and a father, that either is irrelevant, and that's wrong. We shouldn't be lying to children, and this debate is about the future of our children. Thank you.
Who are the Democrats that you referred to earlier?
Do you anticipate that Archbishop Nienstedt is going to be involved in a campaign against this particular bill at the level that he was in support of the marriage amendment?
Well, The Minnesota Catholic Conference is the public policy arm of the church, and we will be opposing the bill and communicating to Catholics that they should oppose the bill as well. As for particular strategies, now that we've seen a bill today, that's under discussion.
Who are the Democrats that you referred to?
Senator Leroy Stumpf has, as far as I am aware, has come on record, and I believe Senator Lau Kunin as well.
Do you have a viewpoint on Representative Gruenhagen's comment that being gay is something people can help?
No, that's not something that we take a position on. The issue is not primarily about homosexuality. The issue is about what is marriage, why is it important, and what is the public good that marriage serves. People can have their own particular views about those sorts of matters. That's not something that the Minnesota for Marriage takes a position on. I respect Representative Gruenhagen. He's an articulate defender of marriage, but that's not something that Minnesota for Marriage speaks to specifically.
So Representative Gruenhagen, will you answer that? You think this is a lifestyle choice, that it's not a genetic choice? People are not born gay?
Yeah, it doesn't matter what my opinion is. It matters what the scientific facts are. And again, the human genome map was completed in 2003. There is no gay gene. And the result is that it is a sexual choice versus an immutable characteristic, such as the color of your skin or your ethnic background or whatever it might be. The facts are in on that. That's not really disputable. And to continue to report that people are born that way simply does not line up with repeatable, observable scientific facts. One other question about the bill and religious liberty. You know, regardless of what's in the bill, we know that activist groups can bring lawsuits against bills. And our courts have sometimes had a history of activist decisions. So, I mean, a lawsuit against the bill, regardless of what provisions you have in there to protect children or religious liberty, can obviously be struck down by a court over a period of time. And we know that there were court cases already in Minnesota attempting to overturn DOMA.
I have some questions about the studies that you were talking about. Was that looking at the number of parents in a household, or was that looking at the sex of the actual parents? Because I'm just wondering when you're talking about...
In relationship to the 2,500 studies?
Well, the two that you were just citing before, I'm just wondering, is this something that was looking at single
I think I can
households?
talk to you offline on that. I've got copies of the study. You can find them on the internet, and there's also organizations that can forward them to you. To get into the weeds of the particular study, I don't think it's probably appropriate at this time.
Representative, at the news conference this morning announcing the bill, there were several families, same-sex couples and their children here. Are you saying that those children and those particular families might be at risk of some kind? Or?
Let me just answer that briefly. It doesn't matter what my opinion is, okay? It matters what the studies and the facts are. And the latest study, this is out of the Washington Times, it was the largest study by Mark Regerness, a sociology professor at the University of Texas. And it's the gold standard in terms of how children fared in traditional marriage situations versus with homosexual or gay couples. Over 3,000 randomly selected American young adults. And the overwhelming conclusion of that study is that children fare better when they have a mom and a dad, because moms and dads bring unique characteristics to children that no other set of relationships can do. Okay? Now, that's not my opinion. That's the conclusion of the study. And you can find the study. Obviously, the Washington Times found it. And just do your research, which I believe you're paid to do. And you can find those studies. Thank you.
All right. I think we'll take one last question, if anybody has one.
You spoke about Democrats from areas that voted against the amendment. What about the opposite of that, Republicans from areas that voted against it? I believe your own district voted against it, if I'm not mistaken.
My district did vote against it. 52% voted against the amendment.
Do you feel any responsibility to reflect that in your own decisions on the issue?
That's a rather close election in my district. There was a significant portion of people that didn't vote at all in my district. So being the chief author of the amendment, no. However, there are senators in areas that have very significant votes for the marriage amendment, much larger than 52%, some in the mid-60s. And the only advice I would give to those senators and representatives in the legislature is I caution you to go against the will of your public. And I think especially by a sizable vote. I think that's the last question for us today. We thank you for coming.
A no vote does not equate to.
It's not the last question.
What is the last question? But a no vote did not equate to support for same-sex marriage. Let me repeat that. A no vote on the ballot did not equate to support for same-sex marriage. A yes vote absolutely was a vote in opposition. So there's a difference. There's a marked difference between districts where there was a large majority yes and maybe a smaller majority no, because not every no vote was in support of same-sex marriage. They just simply said current law is adequate for us.
Thank you for coming.
With that, thank you very much. That concludes the press conference.